In 2013, scientists announced the discovery of a new mammal species, not a beetle, not a fungus, a warm-blooded, fur-covered mammal, the kind of animal that is supposed to be impossible to miss, and it had already been sitting in museum drawers since the 1920s. Collected, preserved, labeled, sitting there for nearly a century while researchers walked past it, never realizing it was something entirely different from anything previously known. That was not a fluke. For 2 full decades, from 1999 to 2019, scientists formally described a new Amazon vertebrate species roughly every 18 days. Fish, frogs, birds, reptiles, mammals, without interruption. For 20 years, the forest kept producing animals no human had ever formally recognized before, and by current estimates, there are still thousands of species alive in the Amazon right now that have never been seen, touched, or named by science. Not hiding underground, not in deep ocean trenches, living openly inside a forest that satellites have been photographing for decades. Then there is the snake, collected in the western Amazon, its physical features placed it simultaneously inside 3 completely different snake families. Researchers could not agree on what it was. They still cannot. It does not fit cleanly inside any category the classification system has. And that raises a question that is harder to answer than it should be. How is this still possible? How can a forest that has been studied for more than 500 years keep producing creatures that do not fit the systems built to understand them? And what does it say about how much of life on Earth we have actually managed to grasp? Tonight, we go into the Amazon and into the question of why this forest may be the one place on Earth where complete knowledge keeps proving impossible. If this is your kind of thing, hit like and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it keeps this channel going. And drop a comment below. Are you watching this winding down for the night, or watching this during your active day? Now, let's begin. Before any animal emerges from the foliage, before any unfamiliar sound travels through the dark water channels, the Amazon first reveals itself through scale. Rivers continue beyond the horizon for days at a time. Storm clouds gather over stretches of forest, so vast that their rainfall never reaches every part of the basin below. The Amazon covers approximately 5.5 million square kilometers across South America, occupying an area larger than the continental United States. Distance inside it behaves differently. A map can flatten the shape of the forest, yet the lived reality remains immense enough to absorb entire expeditions without leaving a visible mark. Water forms the foundation beneath nearly everything there. The Amazon basin contains close to 1/5 of all fresh water flowing across Earth's surface, collected through an interconnected system of rivers, wetlands, flooded plains, and seasonal channels that shift continuously with rainfall. At the center moves the Amazon River itself, extending approximately 6,400 kilometers from the Andes Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean. More than 1,100 tributaries feed into it, and 17 of those tributaries are longer than 1,500 kilometers on their own, carrying sediment, nutrients, and organic matter through distances that can take weeks to cross. Near the Atlantic coast, the river releases around 209,000 cubic meters of water every second into the sea. The current pushes outward with such force that diluted fresh water can still be detected 160 kilometers from shore, spreading beneath the ocean surface in enormous drifting plumes. From orbit, the mouth of the river resembles smoke dispersing through dark blue water. Above the basin rises a layered forest arranged almost vertically. The highest level is the emergent layer, where giant trees stand above the rest of the canopy and receive uninterrupted sunlight and wind. Beneath them stretches the canopy itself, dense enough in many places to resemble a suspended landscape rather than a collection of separate trees. Monkeys, birds, orchids, and insects move through that elevated world, while rarely touching the ground below. Lower still rests the understory, warm and dim, where filtered light arrives only in scattered fragments between leaves. At the bottom lies the forest floor, receiving less than 1% of the sunlight that reaches the upper canopy. Even during midday, the ground remains in a kind of permanent twilight. Moisture settles into bark, roots, and fallen wood. Fungi spread silently across decomposing trunks, while insects reduce dead material back into soil with extraordinary speed. Every layer operates almost as its own ecosystem, with distinct temperatures, food webs, and forms of life adapted to specific heights within the forest. The Amazon in its modern form began taking shape approximately 55 million years ago, though the basin itself is far older than the rainforest now covering it. Through asteroid impacts, volcanic winters, shifting oceans, and every major mass extinction event in Earth's history, the forest endured through continual adaptation. Other ecosystems vanished entirely, while this region persisted, altering gradually without breaking continuity. Bien, that immense age still lingers inside the structure of the Amazon. Species evolved in isolation for spans of time longer than human civilization itself. Rivers separated populations, dense vegetation concealed movement, entire ecological worlds formed above, below, and between visible spaces. A forest this old and this layered does not surrender its contents easily. In the northern reaches of the Amazon, certain mountains rise from the forest, with shapes so abrupt they appear unfinished, their stone walls lifting vertically from the surrounding canopy before flattening into broad plateaus above the clouds. Rain gathers along their cliffs and falls in thin silver threads toward the jungle below. From a distance, the tepui resemble islands suspended in the sky, detached from the world around them. Beneath those formations lies the Guyana Shield, a geological structure approximately 1.7 billion years old, among the oldest exposed rock systems remaining anywhere on Earth. Long before the Amazon rainforest existed, these stones had already endured continental drift, vanished oceans, and atmospheric conditions unlike anything found on the modern planet. Over immense stretches of time, erosion carved the shield into isolated tabletop mountains, separated by sheer cliffs and deep valleys. Those cliffs became biological walls. Species living atop individual tepui remained cut off from neighboring plateaus for millions of years, evolving in near total isolation. Tiny frogs, carnivorous plants, insects, and lizards adapted to the cool mist-covered summits until they no longer resembled relatives living below. Some exist only on a single mountain and nowhere else on Earth, confined to environments smaller than a city, yet separated from surrounding forests by barriers impossible for them to cross. That same pattern extends outward through much of the Amazon itself. The forest appears continuous from above, yet biologically, it functions more like an archipelago composed of thousands of isolated habitats. Rivers divide populations. Elevation shifts alter rainfall and temperature. Variations in canopy density change the amount of available light reaching lower vegetation. Species adapted to one region often remain absent from another, despite distances of only a few kilometers. The Amazon River forms one of the strongest barriers of all. For many animals, the width and current of the river make crossing nearly impossible. Birds reluctant to fly over open water remain confined to one bank for generations. Small mammals avoid exposed shorelines entirely. Reptile populations separated by the river continue evolving independently over millions of years until opposite banks contain distinct communities, despite existing only meters apart. This pattern became known among biologists as the river barrier hypothesis, a model explaining why the Amazon contains such extraordinary concentrations of unique species. Rivers do not merely transport water through the forest, they divide evolution itself, creating invisible boundaries that organisms rarely cross. Relieved far to the west, the Andes Mountains shape the basin in quieter ways. Moist air moving inland from the Atlantic rises against the mountain slopes and cools, releasing rainfall across the Amazon below. Without the Andes acting as a massive atmospheric wall, much of the rainforest would receive far less moisture. Along the eastern slopes of the mountains, isolated valleys and cloud forests formed under highly specific climatic conditions, allowing species to adapt within narrow environmental ranges found nowhere else in the basin. Even beneath the rivers, isolation continues. The Amazon floor is not flat, but folded into ancient riverbeds, submerged ridges, drowned valleys, and buried plateaus left behind by older geological eras. Seasonal floods cover some regions while leaving others untouched. Aquatic species become separated within underwater corridors, hidden beneath sediment and vegetation, evolving unnoticed in channels few humans have ever mapped directly. The result is a forest that conceals life through structure as much as distance. Isolation exists in stone, water, elevation, and darkness, dividing the Amazon into countless biological compartments where evolution continues quietly beyond ordinary observation. Somewhere beneath the canopy, a seed falls into the soil every few seconds. Millions more descend across the basin at the same moment, vanishing into roots, waterlogged leaves, fungal threads, and the slow chemistry of decomposition. The scale becomes difficult to picture long before the counting even begins. Current estimates suggest the Amazon contains approximately 390 billion individual trees belonging to around 16,000 separate species. Even those figures remain provisional, adjusted repeatedly as satellite surveys improve and new regions are sampled. In certain areas, a single hectare of rainforest, an area roughly equivalent to 2 football fields, can contain as many as 650 different tree species. That is more tree diversity than exists across the entirety of North America. The density continues downward into smaller forms of life. Entomologists estimate the Amazon may contain between 2.5 million and 3 million insect species, though fewer than 100,000 have been formally described. Countless beetles, ants, moths, wasps, termites, and flies remain unnamed, existing only as fragments collected in traps or brief observations recorded in notebooks, before disappearing again into vegetation dense enough to conceal entire populations within a few square meters. Beneath the surface lies another layer, even less understood. Amazonian soil is believed to contain nearly 1 million fungal species, the overwhelming majority unknown to science. Networks of microscopic filaments spread through roots and decaying wood in patterns too intricate to map completely. Some fungi survive for centuries underground without producing visible fruiting bodies. Others appear only for a few nights each year after precise combinations of rainfall, humidity, and temperature align. The rivers carry similar complexity. More than 3,000 fish species have already been described within the Amazon basin, exceeding the total fish diversity of the Atlantic Ocean. Researchers suspect at least 1,000 additional species remain undocumented, many confined to isolated tributaries, submerged caves, flooded forests, or seasonal waterways inaccessible during much of the year. In blackwater rivers alone, subtle differences in acidity and mineral content create conditions where neighboring channels can support entirely different aquatic communities. Above the waterline, birds move through the basin in extraordinary concentration. Approximately 1,300 bird species have been formally identified in the Amazon, representing nearly one-third of all bird species on Earth, gathered within a single interconnected region. Macaws cross open sky above flooded plains, while antbirds remain hidden in dense undergrowth only meters away, each adapted to highly specific ecological conditions shaped over immense periods of isolation. Even after centuries of biological study, the rate of discovery has not slowed in the way scientists once expected. Between 1999 and 2019, researchers formally described 381 new vertebrate species from the Amazon, including fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. For 2 continuous decades, the forest produced more than one newly described vertebrate species every 3 weeks. The numbers themselves begin to alter the meaning of knowledge. In most ecosystems, cataloged species eventually approach something resembling completeness. The Amazon resists that process. Every survey expands the scale of what remains unseen. Each discovery shifts attention toward additional absences, hidden populations, and ecological layers still unresolved. Meant. What science currently recognizes within the Amazon is not a finished inventory. It is a partial outline drawn around a living system so large and biologically dense that even its known diversity represents only a fraction of the whole. In natural history museums, drawers slide open with a soft wooden sound, revealing rows of preserved animals collected decades earlier by researchers who believed they already understood what they were looking at. Labels fade slowly with time. Ink curls at the edges. Some specimens remain untouched for generations before someone notices a detail that does not quite belong. That happened in 2013 with the olinguito, a small carnivorous mammal from the cloud forests connected to the greater Amazonian region. For more than 100 years, preserved olinguito specimens sat inside museum collections, classified as members of a completely different genus. Only after DNA analysis and close skeletal comparison did researchers realize they had been observing an undescribed species the entire time. The animal had already passed through laboratories, archives, and zoological studies while remaining effectively invisible to science. A similar quiet misreading surrounded the Tapanuli orangutan, formally identified in 2017. The great ape occupied a fragment of degraded forest, considered too isolated and too damaged to contain anything biologically new. Yet, genetic analysis revealed an entirely distinct orangutan species surviving within that shrinking habitat, unnoticed partly because researchers assumed discovery was no longer possible in a place so heavily studied. The Amazon repeatedly produces animals that disrupt expectation in this way, not through mythic impossibility, but through combinations of traits that resist easy classification. In 2015, researchers identified Vanzosauria multiscutata, a lizard species whose physical characteristics resembled reptiles from South America, Africa, and Australia simultaneously. The convergence appeared so unusual that some zoologists initially suspected the specimens had been mislabeled. Evolution, working under similar environmental pressures across separated continents, had shaped unrelated species toward nearly identical forms. Electric eels revealed another complication. For centuries, scientists believed the Amazon contained a single dominant electric eel species. Then, in 2020, Researchers formally identified electrophorus voltae, capable of producing approximately 860 volts, the strongest bioelectrical discharge ever recorded in a living organism. Its electrical output exceeded previous records by nearly 300 volts, altering assumptions about the biological limits of electricity generation in vertebrate animals. Elsewhere in the forest, classification becomes blurred not through power but appearance. Fulgora laternaria, commonly called the peanut head bug, carries an elongated structure projecting from its head that resembles the face of a reptile with unsettling precision. The mimicry became so convincing that entomologists debated for decades whether the resemblance served a defensive evolutionary function or emerged accidentally through unrelated anatomical pressures. The boto, the Amazon River dolphin, challenges understanding in quieter ways. It moves through sediment-heavy rivers where visibility collapses almost entirely, navigating through echolocation alone. Pulses of sound travel outward through opaque water and return as detailed spatial information processed by neural systems refined over millions of years. In conditions where engineered sonar struggles with distortion and interference, the dolphin moves effortlessly between roots, branches, and flooded vegetation. The forest also carries creatures once believed permanently lost. Biologists refer to them as Lazarus species, animals presumed extinct before being rediscovered alive after decades or even centuries without confirmed sightings. More Lazarus rediscoveries have emerged from the Amazon than from any other ecosystem on Earth. Species vanish into inaccessible valleys, isolated tributaries, or overlooked fragments of habitat, continuing their existence beyond scientific awareness until chance observation brings them briefly back into view. Over time, these discoveries accumulate into a larger pattern. The Amazon does not merely contain unfamiliar life. It repeatedly produces organisms that expose the limits of the systems humans built to organize life in the first place. On certain maps produced by Brazil's National Indian Foundation, known as FUNAI, large sections of the Amazon appear strangely empty. Rivers vanish into blank green spaces. Survey markings stop abruptly at invisible boundaries. These regions are designated as uncontacted territory, protected areas where isolated indigenous communities continue living beyond sustained contact with the outside world. Scientific expeditions are prohibited from entering many of them, leaving entire portions of the forest biologically undocumented. Researchers estimate that approximately 137 uncontacted tribes still exist within the Amazon basin. Some are known only through distant aerial observations, traces of cultivated land visible through the canopy, or narrow footpaths emerging briefly at riverbanks before disappearing again into vegetation. Their territories often overlap with some of the least studied ecosystems on Earth, not because scientists lack interest, but because legal protection and physical inaccessibility place those regions beyond conventional field research. Among the largest of these protected areas lies Vale do Javari in western Brazil, a territory larger than Austria. Dense forest, winding tributaries, and seasonal flooding isolate the region for much of the year. The Brazilian government formally restricts scientific access there in order to protect the communities living inside it from disease and outside disruption. As a result, much of its biodiversity remains entirely unmapped. Mammals, insects, amphibians, and plants may exist there without ever having been formally recorded by modern biology. Technology has attempted to compensate from above. Aircraft equipped with LiDAR, short for light detection and ranging, pass over remote sections of the forest and send pulses of laser light through openings in the canopy. The returning signals reveal hidden river systems, ancient clearings, buried earthworks, and subtle variations in vegetation density impossible to detect with ordinary photography. Yet LiDAR only outlines structure. It cannot identify the insects moving beneath leaves, the fungi spreading through submerged roots, or the nocturnal animals hidden below the branches. Far deeper inside the basin, some regions have acquired an informal designation among researchers: NP zones, meaning areas of extremely negative physical entry. In these places, terrain, flood cycles, humidity, and canopy thickness combine to make ground-level access nearly impossible with current technology. Boats become trapped in submerged root systems. Helicopters cannot land. Satellite visibility collapses beneath layered vegetation. Even short expeditions require enormous logistical support while covering only tiny distances. Seasonal flooding intensifies the problem. Large sections of the Amazon exist as varzea and agapo forests, ecosystems that transform completely with the rise and fall of water levels. During flood season, rivers expand outward through the trees for months at a time, submerging trunks and converting forest corridors into dark aquatic passageways. Fish move among branches where monkeys traveled during the dry season. Then the waters retreat again, leaving behind exposed sediment, isolated pools, and rapidly changing habitats. Maintaining long-term biological studies within those conditions becomes extraordinarily difficult. Observation sites disappear underwater. Trails dissolve. Species migrate according to water depth and timing rather than fixed territory. Entire ecological communities shift location before researchers can document them completely. Even now, scientists estimate that the Amazon contains approximately 10,000 kilometers of river systems never formally surveyed by a biological research team. Waterways continue threading through inaccessible regions without specimen collection, acoustic monitoring, or genetic sampling. The forest still contains places where modern science has never stood, not because the technology to observe exists elsewhere, but because the scale and complexity of the Amazon continue resisting complete entry. 30 meters above the rivers and mudbanks, the Amazon becomes another world entirely. Branches interlock so densely that sunlight scatters across leaves before ever reaching the ground below. Vines hang between trunks like suspended bridges. Bromeliads collect pools of rainwater high in the air, forming miniature wetlands where insects breed and tree frogs spend their lives without touching soil. Many species born in the canopy never descend from it at all. Food, shelter, water, and movement exist entirely within that elevated landscape. The canopy extends across the basin like a living roof, usually between 30 and 45 meters above the forest floor. From below, it appears almost solid, but inside, it lies an intricate architecture of leaves, flowers, nests, and climbing pathways occupied by countless forms of life adapted specifically for height. Monkeys travel through connected branches without interruption for kilometers. Gliding mammals launch silently between trunks. Certain orchids grow only in the upper canopy, where humidity, airflow, and sunlight align within narrow ranges impossible to reproduce at lower levels. The trees themselves alter the atmosphere surrounding them. Through transpiration, billions of leaves release enormous quantities of water vapor into the air every day. This moisture rises, cools, and condenses into cloud systems that drift across South America as invisible atmospheric currents known as flying rivers. In total, those airborne rivers carry more water than the Amazon River flowing beneath them. The forest helps generate its own rainfall, maintaining climatic conditions through the collective breathing of vegetation spread across millions of square kilometers. Among the branches moves the dominant predator of this aerial ecosystem, Harpyia, the harpy eagle. Its talons exceed the size of a grizzly bear's claws, curved with enough force to seize monkeys and sloths directly from branches while remaining airborne. Broad wings allow it to navigate through dense vegetation with remarkable precision despite its massive size. High in the canopy, where visibility is fragmented by leaves and shifting light, the eagle moves almost silently. Smaller societies unfold nearby with equal complexity. Leafcutter ants construct colonies containing up to 8 million individuals, operating through collective behavior rather than central control. Workers cut sections of leaves and carry them underground, not for direct consumption, but to cultivate fungus gardens, serving as the colony's primary food source. Separate chambers regulate waste, larvae, and ventilation. Airflow inside the nest remains carefully balanced through tunnels and openings that function as natural climate control systems. Even the soil suspended high above the ground forms its own ecosystem. Organic debris gathers over decades within the forks of massive trees, creating pockets of canopy soil entirely separate from the earth below. Those elevated soils contain unique microbial communities, fungal networks, mites, beetles, and invertebrates found nowhere else in the forest. Entire food webs exist in those suspended gardens meters above the rivers and roots. Far beneath them, Socratia exoryza, commonly called the walking palm, shifts position with extraordinary slowness. By growing new roots toward available light while allowing older roots to die away, the tree gradually moves across the forest floor at a rate of roughly 2 to 3 centimeters per day. Over years, its position changes noticeably, almost as though the forest itself is adjusting its stance. For most of scientific history, this upper world remained largely inaccessible. Systematic canopy research using cranes, suspended platforms, and hot air balloons only began in earnest during the 1990s. Much of the Amazon's aerial ecosystem has therefore been studied for barely 3 decades, a remarkably short period for a habitat so biologically dense and structurally complex. Beneath the roots and fallen leaves, below the visible forest and the movement of rivers, the Amazon continues downward into a hidden biological system almost entirely removed from ordinary sight. The ground itself is alive with motion. Fungal threads spread through darkness in branching networks so extensive that individual trees become physically connected across vast distances underground. These structures, known as mycorrhizal networks, bind together the roots of plants throughout the basin. Through them, trees exchange nutrients, water, and chemical signals in patterns resembling a slow biological conversation. Carbon moves from older trees toward younger ones, growing in shade. Warning compounds pass silently through fungal filaments after insect damage begins in one area, allowing nearby plants to begin producing defensive chemicals before the insects arrive. The forest floor behaves less like isolated organisms competing for survival and more like a linked metabolic system distributed across millions of square kilometers. Inside that soil exists a density of life almost impossible to visualize clearly. A single teaspoon of Amazonian earth contains more microorganisms than there are humans on Earth. Roughly 10 billion bacteria, archaea, fungal cells, and microscopic organisms occupy each gram of soil, feeding, reproducing, and exchanging compounds continuously beneath the surface. Entire ecological interactions unfold at scales too small for direct human perception, shaping the chemistry of the forest from below. Yet the soil itself presents a paradox. Despite supporting the most biodiverse rainforest on the planet, Amazonian soil is remarkably poor in nutrients. Heavy rainfall washes minerals downward and away over immense periods of time, leaving surprisingly infertile ground beneath one of Earth's richest ecosystems. The forest survives through an almost perfectly closed recycling loop. Dead leaves, fallen branches, carcasses, and waste material are broken down and returned to living systems within weeks. Nutrients rarely remain in the soil for long. Instead, they move constantly through roots, fungi, insects, and microbial communities in continuous circulation. Far deeper underground, life persists in forms only recently discovered. In 2019, researchers identified bacterial communities living between 10 and 30 meters beneath the Amazon surface. These microorganisms appeared capable of metabolizing minerals directly from surrounding rock, surviving independently from sunlight and organic plant material. Similar strategies had previously been associated primarily with deep ocean vents and subsurface geological systems rather than tropical rainforest ecosystems. Water continues beneath them as well. In 2011, geophysicists confirmed the existence of the Hamza River, a subterranean flow moving roughly 4,000 meters beneath the Amazon River itself. The underground river extends nearly 400 kilometers in width, broader than the surface river above it, though it moves with extraordinary slowness. Water within the Hamza system may require thousands of years to complete journeys. The visible Amazon finishes within weeks. Larger organisms shape the underground world in quieter ways. Rhinodrillus preolii, the giant Amazonian earthworm, can reach lengths of 1.5 meters while tunneling through saturated soil layers. As it moves, the worm aerates, compacted ground, redistributes nutrients, and alters water flow through sediment in ways scientists are still attempting to measure accurately. All of this activity unfolds beneath a forest already dense beyond comprehension at the surface. Roots, fungi, microorganisms, bacteria, and underground waterways continue extending downward into hidden ecological layers where decomposition, communication, and chemical exchange proceed without interruption. Much of the Amazon's biological complexity exists not in the visible forest itself, but in the living darkness underneath it. From above, the rivers of the Amazon resemble moving bands of different colors threaded through the forest. Some flow pale brown, thick with suspended sediment carried from distant mountains. Others appear almost black beneath the sun, stained dark by dissolved organic compounds released from decaying vegetation. Biologists classify them broadly as whitewater and blackwater systems, though the distinction reaches far beyond appearance. Each river chemistry supports entirely different communities of plants, fish, microorganisms, and insects adapted to specific mineral content, acidity, and light conditions. Near the city of Manaus, two of those systems converge in one of the strangest hydrological scenes on Earth. The dark waters of the Rio Negro meet the pale, sediment-heavy Amazon River at a place called the Encontro das Aguas, the meeting of the waters. For approximately 6 kilometers, the rivers flow beside one another without fully mixing. Differences in temperature, density, and current speed keep them separated in distinct bands, black beside brown, moving through the basin together while remaining chemically apart. Beneath those surfaces moves one of the largest freshwater fish on Earth, Arapaima gigas, also known as the pirarucu. Some individuals reach 3 meters in length and weigh more than 200 kilograms. Fossil evidence suggests the species has remained physically similar for approximately 23 million years, surviving through immense geological and climatic shifts with relatively little anatomical change. Its scales overlap in layered mineral structures strong enough to resist the bites of piranhas and other predators. Despite living entirely within water, the pirarucu cannot rely solely on gills. It must surface regularly to breathe air, rising every 10 to 20 minutes with a low, hollow sound before descending again beneath the river. That behavior remains from an earlier stage in Amazonian history when shallow oxygen-poor waters favored fish capable of supplementing gill respiration with atmospheric breathing. The piranhas surrounding it behave differently from their popular reputation. Between 30 and 60 species inhabit the Amazon basin, yet most feed primarily on fruit, seeds, carrion, and insects rather than large prey. Only a small number are active predators. The dramatic feeding frenzies associated with piranhas usually occur during the dry season when shrinking water levels compress fish populations into isolated pools and food competition intensifies sharply. Electric eels hunt through another strategy entirely. Rather than attacking randomly, groups of eels have been observed herding schools of fish into shallow, confined areas using coordinated low-voltage electrical pulses. Once prey become concentrated and disoriented, the eels release powerful discharges capable of stunning multiple fish simultaneously. Electricity functions both as a weapon and a form of communication moving invisibly through dark water. Elsewhere along the river floor glide freshwater stingrays belonging to the family Potamotrigonidae. Their ancestors were once marine rays inhabiting ancient coastal waters. As sea levels receded millions of years ago, isolated populations became trapped inside evolving river systems. Over roughly 15 million years, those stranded lineages adapted fully to freshwater conditions and diverged into approximately 30 entirely new species unique to South American rivers. The Amazon's aquatic world still carries traces of those ancient transitions. Marine ancestry survives inside freshwater bodies. Air-breathing fish rise through oxygen-poor water beneath flooded forests. Chemical differences between rivers shape invisible biological borders. The basin appears unified on maps, yet beneath the surface it separates continually into distinct aquatic worlds moving through darkness beside one another. Across the Amazon, chemistry has become a form of survival as sophisticated as teeth, claws, or camouflage. Venoms seep through fangs, spines, stingers, and skin in combinations assembled over millions of years of evolutionary pressure. More venomous species exist per square kilometer here than in any other ecosystem on Earth, yet most of their chemical compounds remain unstudied. Entire molecular systems continue circulating through the forest without names, formulas, or complete analysis. Among the most infamous is Paraponera clavata, the bullet ant. Moving through low vegetation and tree trunks in slow, deliberate lines, the insect appears unremarkable until disturbed. Its sting occupies the highest level of the Schmidt-Payne index, the scale developed by entomologist Justin Schmidt to classify insect sting intensity. Schmidt described the sensation as pure, intense, brilliant pain, like walking over flaming charcoal with a 3-inch nail embedded in the heel. The venom itself contains neurotoxic compounds designed to overwhelm mammalian nervous systems rapidly enough to discourage predation after a single encounter. For the Satere-Mawe people of Brazil, the ant became part of a ritual marking the transition into adulthood. Woven gloves filled with live bullet ants are worn for approximately 10 minutes while the insects sting repeatedly through the fibers. The initiation is not performed once, but traditionally repeated around 20 times over the course of adolescence. The ceremony transforms one of the forest's most painful defensive systems into a social and cultural threshold shaped through endurance. Elsewhere in the basin, toxicity appears in smaller and brighter forms. The poison dart frogs of the Dendrobatidae family display vivid colors across their skin, blue, yellow, orange, and black patterns standing out against wet leaves and moss. Around 170 species are known, and the toxins covering their skin can contain as many as 200 distinct alkaloid compounds simultaneously. Some interfere with muscle contraction. Others disrupt nerve transmission or cardiac rhythm through highly specific biochemical pathways. Yet the frogs themselves do not manufacture those toxins directly. Individuals raised in captivity on artificial diets become entirely harmless. Their chemical defense originates instead from insects consumed in the wild, particularly ants and mites, whose own toxic compounds originate from certain rainforest plants. The result is a layered biological chain in which plant chemistry passes upward through insects before accumulating inside amphibian skin. Scientists have only partially mapped this transfer system, despite decades of study. Larger predators rely on more direct delivery mechanisms. Lachesis muta, the bushmaster snake, can reach lengths of 3.7 meters, making it the longest venomous snake in the Western Hemisphere. Hidden beneath leaf litter along humid forest corridors, it strikes with venom capable of attacking the body through multiple systems simultaneously. Certain compounds disrupt blood clotting, others destroy surrounding muscle tissue. Additional toxins trigger sudden drops in blood pressure, severe enough to induce systemic collapse. Within modern medicine, compounds originating from Amazonian organisms already shape pharmaceutical treatments across the world. More than 25% of Western pharmaceuticals derive directly or indirectly from chemicals first identified in rainforest plants and animals. Yet scientists estimate that fewer than 1% of Amazon species have been screened for potentially useful compounds. The forest therefore contains not only biological diversity, but chemical diversity on an immense scale. Molecules capable of paralyzing nerves, regulating blood pressure, suppressing infection, or altering cellular function continue circulating quietly through roots, skin, venom glands, and insect bodies, much of it still entirely unknown beyond the forest itself. Along quiet sections of blackwater streams, dead leaves drift slowly across the surface, rotating gently with the current. Some of them are not leaves at all. Monocurus polyacanthus, the Amazon leaf fish, has evolved a body so precisely shaped around imitation that even close observation struggles to separate animal from debris. A thin appendage extends from its lower jaw like the stem of a decaying leaf. Its skin carries patterns resembling leaf veins and fungal discoloration. Rather than swimming normally, it drifts through the water at the angle of a sinking leaf, allowing prey to approach without alarm before disappearing into its mouth in a sudden movement. Elsewhere, concealment becomes almost architectural. Certain Amazon bark mantises reproduce not only the color of surrounding tree trunks, but their texture as well. Their bodies contain raised structures resembling patches of lichen, cracked bark, and irregular wood grain. Even shadows along their limbs align with the uneven surfaces they inhabit. Remaining motionless completes the illusion until the insect effectively dissolves into the trunk itself. Some forms of camouflage rely not on imitation of texture, but on the removal of visibility altogether. Greta Odo, the glass-winged butterfly, carries wings that appear nearly invisible in forest light. Rather than containing pigment, The transparent sections are formed through microscopic structural arrangements that reduce light reflection. As the butterfly moves through broken sunlight beneath the trees, only thin outlines and drifting shadows reveal its presence. The Amazon also contains some of the most concentrated examples of mimicry known in biology. More than 40 harmless snake species have independently evolved the red, yellow, and black banding associated with deadly coral snakes. Predators that learn to avoid the venomous originals often avoid the harmless imitators as well. This process, known as Batesian mimicry, allows vulnerable species to survive by borrowing the warning appearance of dangerous ones. In other cases, genuinely toxic species evolve toward shared visual patterns together, reinforcing predator avoidance collectively through what biologists call Mullerian mimicry. The Amazon contains the highest known concentration of both systems on Earth, creating regions where color patterns function almost like a shared language shaped through survival. Camouflage extends into behavior as much as anatomy. Ceratophrys cornuta, the Amazon horned frog, buries itself almost entirely beneath leaf litter with only its mouth exposed. The frog remains motionless for extraordinary lengths of time, sometimes waiting weeks beside narrow forest pathways until insects, rodents, or smaller reptiles move within range. Its success depends not on pursuit, but on becoming indistinguishable from the forest floor itself. Even sound has entered this evolutionary theater of imitation. In 2019, researchers studying Amazon butterflies discovered species capable of producing ultrasonic clicks mimicking the warning signals of toxic moths. Predatory bats interpreting those signals avoid attacking, mistaking harmless butterflies for chemically defended prey. This form of acoustic camouflage revealed that mimicry in the Amazon extends beyond appearance into entirely invisible sensory systems. Within such an environment, survival often depends less on strength than perception. Animals disappear into bark, leaves, sound, water, and light until the boundaries between organism and habitat begin to dissolve. The forest rewards those capable of becoming part of the background completely, and over millions of years, evolution has refined that disappearance into one of the Amazon's most intricate arts. Long before laboratories began cataloging rainforest compounds, knowledge moved through the Amazon by memory, ritual, observation, and spoken language. Certain plants were gathered only during specific seasons. Others were avoided entirely except during illness. Bark, sap, roots, insects, and frogs became part of medical systems refined over thousands of years through direct experience within the forest itself. The scientific study of this knowledge became known as ethnobiology, a field examining how indigenous communities understand biological systems. Again and again, researchers working in the Amazon encountered the same pattern. Indigenous groups consistently identified medicinal plants, animal behaviors, ecological relationships, and toxic compounds long before those same discoveries emerged through formal scientific methods. One of the clearest examples came from curare, a paralytic substance used for centuries by Amazonian tribes on blowgun darts. Produced from combinations of rainforest plants, the poison caused rapid muscular paralysis in hunted animals while leaving consciousness intact. Western researchers eventually isolated the active compounds during the 20th century and developed tubocurarine, now used globally as a muscle relaxant during surgical procedures. A substance refined through generations of indigenous practice became part of modern medicine only after science learned how it worked chemically. Among the Yanomami people alone, more than 400 plant species are used medicinally. Fewer than 40 of those plants have undergone detailed scientific study. The remaining species represent an enormous body of unanalyzed chemical information preserved not inside written databases, but within oral traditions and practical knowledge passed between generations. In 2003, researchers working alongside the Matses people investigated a tree bark treatment traditionally used against fever and infection. Laboratory analysis revealed compounds showing complete effectiveness against a drug-resistant strain of malaria during controlled trials. Scientists searching independently through conventional survey methods had failed to identify the same biological activity despite decades of research in surrounding regions. The discovery emerged only because the search began from indigenous knowledge rather than random sampling. That relationship between science and indigenous expertise remains ethically complex. Under the Nagoya Protocol, international law recognizes that biological knowledge originating within indigenous territories belongs to the communities who developed and preserved it. Researchers and pharmaceutical companies seeking access to such knowledge must now navigate legal agreements concerning consent, compensation, and intellectual rights. The framework protects communities from exploitation while also reshaping how biological research occurs across the Amazon. At the same time, another form of loss is unfolding quietly. The average age of fluent traditional knowledge holders within many Amazonian groups continues rising. Younger generations increasingly move toward urban areas or shift away from ancestral languages under social and economic pressure. Ethnobiologists and linguists warn that when the final fluent speakers of certain languages die, highly specific ecological knowledge accumulated over thousands of years may disappear permanently alongside them. Approximately 180 Amazonian languages are still spoken today, yet more than 30 are now used by fewer than 10 people. Within many of those languages exist precise names for medicinal plants, seasonal cycles, animal behaviors, soil conditions, and biological interactions never fully translated into scientific terminology. The forest therefore contains not only undiscovered species, but undiscovered understanding. Entire systems of biological knowledge continue surviving in fragile oral traditions carried through villages, river communities, and isolated territories. Some of what science still seeks within the Amazon may already be known quietly by people who learned the forest not through instruments or classification, but through continuous life inside it. Long before trees spread across the basin, before roots bound the soil together, and rainfall gathered beneath the canopy, western Amazonia existed beneath shallow water. Between approximately 65 and 23 million years ago, much of the region formed part of an immense inland sea known as the Pebos system. Warm, brackish water extended across enormous distances where dense rainforest now stands, connected intermittently to the Caribbean through shifting channels and coastal floodplains. The evidence remained hidden for millions of years. Inside sediment layers deep within the basin, marine fossils began appearing far from any modern coastline. Fossilized sharks, rays, mollusks, and coral structures were discovered thousands of kilometers inland, embedded within Miocene rock formations beneath the Amazon. Their presence revealed that creatures once associated entirely with marine environments had inhabited this region long before the river system existed in its current form. Gradually, the landscape began to change. As the Andes Mountains continued rising along the western edge of South America, approximately 10 to 12 million years ago, they altered the drainage patterns of the continent itself. Water that once flowed westward toward the Pacific became trapped behind the growing mountain range. The inland sea slowly transformed into a vast freshwater lake system threaded with wetlands and slow channels. Over immense periods of geological time, pressure built until the basin eventually reversed direction, draining eastward toward the Atlantic and forming the foundation of the Amazon River network known today. That transformation remained imprinted within the biology of the basin. The boto, the Amazon River dolphin, carries the anatomical memory of marine ancestry within its body. Its distant ancestors were oceanic dolphins trapped inland as the sea receded and freshwater conditions expanded across the basin. Over roughly 15 million years, they adapted to muddy rivers and flooded forests, where visibility became nearly useless. Their eyes reduced in functional importance while echolocation grew increasingly refined, allowing navigation through dense, submerged vegetation and sediment-heavy water. Other species followed similar evolutionary paths. Freshwater stingrays drifting across sandy river bottoms descend from marine ancestors stranded during the retreat of the ancient sea. Needlefish and sawfish lineages also retain traces of that transition, surviving as evolutionary remnants of ecosystems that vanished millions of years ago. The Amazon's aquatic life, therefore, contains not only rainforest adaptations, but biological echoes of an older marine world layered beneath them. Among the most extraordinary fossils recovered from this vanished environment was Stupendemys geographicus, a giant turtle discovered in Venezuelan Amazon sediments dating to approximately 8 million years ago. Its shell reached nearly 3 meters across, making it the largest turtle ever identified. Massive horns projected from portions of the shell in some individuals, while bite marks preserved in fossil bone suggested encounters with giant prehistoric crocodilians inhabiting the same waters. The modern forest emerged gradually over those ancient transitions. Marine ecosystems gave way to freshwater wetlands. Wetlands narrowed into rivers. River systems spread through newly forming rainforest corridors as climate and vegetation shifted over millions of years. Each stage left living descendants behind. The Amazon's biodiversity is therefore not the product of a single environment evolving in isolation. It is the accumulated inheritance of multiple worlds layered together across deep time, an inland sea, a continental wetland system, and eventually the rainforest itself. Creatures swimming through the basin today still carry anatomical memories from oceans that disappeared long before human beings existed to witness them. During the great ice ages of the Pleistocene, glaciers advanced across much of the planet. Vast sheets of ice buried northern continents beneath kilometers of frozen weight. The Amazon never froze. No glaciers moved beneath its trees. Yet the forest still changed in profound ways as global climate patterns shifted and rainfall weakened across South America. The basin gradually became drier. Rivers narrowed. Humidity declined. Dense rainforest retreated into scattered pockets separated by expanding stretches of savanna and open woodland. This idea became known as the Pleistocene refugia theory, the proposal that the Amazon survived the ice ages not as one continuous forest, but as isolated refuges surrounded by grassland during the driest climatic periods. Evidence for those ancient transformations emerged from the bottoms of quiet lakes. Researchers drilling sediment cores through Amazonian lake beds discovered layers rich in grass, pollen, and microscopic charcoal particles buried beneath modern rainforest deposits. Regions now covered by dense tropical vegetation once contained open grasslands shaped by fire and prolonged drought. The forest had contracted dramatically before spreading outward again when wetter conditions returned. Within those surviving refugia, populations of animals and plants became isolated from one another for thousands of years. Forest islands separated by hundreds of kilometers prevented species from interbreeding across the basin. Birds, frogs, insects, and mammals adapted independently within each refuge until genetic differences accumulated slowly through isolation. When rainfall eventually increased and rainforest expanded again, those separated populations spread outward into reconnecting habitats, carrying distinct evolutionary histories with them. Modern genetics still preserves traces of those ancient contractions. Many Amazon species show molecular patterns associated with severe population bottlenecks, followed by rapid expansion. Their DNA suggests ancestors surviving in small isolated groups before recolonizing enormous areas once environmental conditions improved. Some lineages appear to have passed through demographic collapses so extreme that only a fraction of their original genetic diversity remained. The exact shape of this process remains heavily debated. Certain scientists argue the refugia were small, fragmented, and numerous, creating ideal conditions for rapid speciation through isolation. Others believe much of the Amazon remained forested even during the driest glacial intervals, suggesting that river dynamics, topography, and local climate variation played larger roles than massive forest collapse. The disagreement continues because the basin itself is too vast and environmentally complex for any single explanation to fit perfectly across all regions. What researchers do agree upon is the rhythm of instability. Over roughly the last 2.5 million years, the Amazon experienced at least 5 major cycles of contraction and expansion tied to shifting glacial climates. The forest repeatedly withdrew, fragmented, recovered, and spread outward again across the basin. Each cycle reshaped migration routes, separated populations, and forced species into new ecological arrangements. Some organisms disappeared entirely during those transitions. Others survived only in isolated valleys, humid mountain slopes, or river corridors where local conditions remained stable enough to support rainforest life. After the climate shifted once more, descendants of those survivors expanded back into recovering ecosystems. That long history carries implications for the hidden species still emerging from the Amazon today. If populations evolved separately within ancient refugia and later dispersed across remote territories, some may now exist in highly isolated regions where no human observer has encountered them, since the last glacial period ended approximately 11,700 years ago. The forest visible today may therefore contain biological lineages shaped by ancient separations whose full existence remains almost entirely unknown. Far from the rivers and forest clearings where discoveries begin, countless unknown Amazonian species spend their first years of scientific existence inside drawers. Some rest in glass jars filled with ethanol. Others lie folded between archival papers, pinned carefully beneath labels written decades earlier in fading ink. Their presence is recorded, preserved, and largely unseen while museums quietly accumulate biological histories faster than science can interpret them. The traditional process of species discovery moves with extraordinary slowness. A field biologist collects an organism during an expedition, often under difficult conditions involving weeks of river travel and dense terrain. The specimen is preserved, cataloged, and shipped to a natural history museum where it enters an immense archive. There, it may remain for years, sometimes generations, before a specialist with the relevant taxonomic expertise studies it closely enough to recognize that it belongs to no known species at all. This delay has created a vast scientific backlog. Natural history museums around the world now contain an estimated 3 billion biological specimens. Taxonomists believe millions of undescribed species already exist inside those collections, waiting for detailed comparison against known organisms. Entire branches of Amazonian biodiversity may therefore already be sitting silently within climate-controlled storage rooms, technically discovered but not yet recognized. In recent years, however, the search for life has begun shifting away from direct observation alone. Environmental DNA, known as eDNA, has opened a different method of exploration. Every organism leaves behind fragments of genetic material through skin cells, waste, mucus, scales, or decaying tissue. Scientists now collect water and soil samples from Amazon ecosystems and sequence all the DNA suspended within them, identifying species from genetic traces without ever physically encountering the organism itself. One survey, conducted in 2022, focused on a single Amazon river system using only eDNA sampling. Researchers identified 85 previously unknown fish species from the genetic material drifting through the water. None had been photographed or captured beforehand. Some may inhabit depths or flooded regions that conventional surveys rarely reach, revealing how much biological information moves invisibly through the basin long before human observers detect its source. Sound has also become a tool for discovery. Across sections of the canopy, researchers now suspend networks of automated microphones that record continuously through day and night. Machine learning systems analyze the recordings, separating overlapping calls from insects, frogs, birds, and mammals hidden beyond direct sight. In 2023, one acoustic monitoring study identified 43 new frog species within a single protected reserve using vocal patterns alone. The pace of discovery increasingly depends not only on laboratories and universities, but also on the people who live within the forest itself. Indigenous community members trained in specimen photography, sound recording, and ecological observation contributed to more than 15% of new Amazon species discoveries during the past decade. Their familiarity with seasonal movements, local habitats, and subtle behavioral patterns often guides scientists toward organisms that conventional surveys overlook entirely. Yet another limitation remains difficult to overcome. The global community of professional taxonomists capable of formally describing species numbers, only around 7,000 individuals worldwide. Scientists estimate that the workforce required to process the Amazon's backlog efficiently would need to be at least 5 to 10 times larger. Even as new technologies accelerate detection, the act of naming life still depends on a remarkably small number of human specialists working patiently against a tide of undiscovered forms. Beneath the visible movement of birds, mammals, reptiles, and trees, another Amazon exists in far greater numbers, hidden inside bodies, roots, bloodstreams, and nervous systems. The forest appears dominated by large organisms because they are easier to see, yet in terms of species count and total biomass, parasites may represent the true rulers of the basin. Every animal, every branch, every patch of water carries smaller lives embedded within larger ones, forming chains of dependence so dense that the rainforest functions less as a collection of individual creatures and more as a living network of occupation. Among the most unsettling examples are the Ophiocordyceps fungi, microscopic spores drifting quietly through humid air until they encounter a carpenter ant moving across the forest floor. Once attached, the fungus penetrates the ant's body and begins spreading through its tissues. Chemical compounds gradually interfere with the insect's nervous system, altering behavior with extraordinary precision. The infected ant abandons its normal routes and climbs vegetation to a very specific height where humidity and temperature favor fungal growth. There it bites into a leaf vein with fatal force and dies. Days later, a slender fungal stalk erupts from the corpse and releases spores downward onto the forest floor below, precisely where new ants are most likely to pass. What appears at first to be a single species is in fact an entire hidden catalog of specialists. Different Ophiocordyceps species target different ant species with astonishing accuracy. Within one small section of Amazon forest, scientists may find dozens of separate fungal lineages, each evolved to manipulate only one particular host. The complexity resembles a biological lock and key system refined over millions of years of coevolution. The plants of the Amazon participate in similar relationships. More than 400 parasitic plant species have been identified across the basin. Some draw nutrients directly from neighboring roots while contributing little themselves. Others remain completely concealed inside host tissues for most of their existence. Certain relatives of the Rafflesia lineage spend nearly their entire lives invisible within another plant, emerging only briefly as flowers before disappearing again into living wood and vine. In the humid understory, the botfly follows an even stranger strategy. Rather than laying eggs directly onto mammals, the adult captures a mosquito in flight and glues its eggs onto the insect's abdomen before releasing it unharmed. When the mosquito later lands to feed on warm blood, body heat triggers the botfly eggs to hatch. The larvae immediately burrow into the skin of the unsuspecting host, transforming the mosquito into an unwilling delivery system in a carefully layered parasitic relay. Far below the river surface, cymathoid isopods pursue another path entirely. As juveniles, these crustaceans enter fish through the gills and attach themselves inside the mouth. One individual transforms into a female, destroys the fish's tongue, and permanently anchors itself to the remaining tissue. From that moment onward, the parasite functions as a living replacement tongue, feeding on blood and mucus while the fish continues eating almost normally. Such relationships reshape the scale of Amazonian biodiversity itself. Scientists estimate that every large vertebrate in the forest carries between 4 and 9 parasite species on average. Each monkey, fish, bird, or reptile therefore supports entire hidden communities within its own body. The true population of Amazon life may be many times larger than traditional surveys suggest, concealed not in distant valleys or unexplored rivers, but inside the organisms already known to science. Long before human instruments entered the Amazon, the forest had already become a landscape of constant transmission. Signals move through leaves, roots, humidity, water, vibration, and electricity with a precision that remained invisible for most of scientific history. What once appeared to be silent vegetation and instinctive animal behavior now resembles a vast exchange system where information travels continuously between organisms sharing the same living space. When insects begin feeding on Amazon trees, the damage triggers the release of volatile chemical compounds into the surrounding air. These compounds drift through the forest canopy, like invisible messages carried on warm currents between branches. Nearby trees detect the airborne chemicals and begin altering their own internal chemistry before the insects ever arrive. Defensive compounds increase within leaves and bark, making the tissues less digestible or more toxic to herbivores approaching from neighboring trees already under attack. The signals themselves contain remarkable specificity. Different herbivores create different chemical signatures depending on the pattern of damage they inflict. Caterpillars chewing broad surfaces produce one atmospheric message. Beetles boring into tissue generate another. Experiments have shown that surrounding trees respond with defenses calibrated to the particular threat detected in the air around them, suggesting that the forest distinguishes between attackers not visually but chemically. Below the soil, another communication system operates through fungal networks binding roots together across long distances. Trees infected by fungal pathogens transmit biochemical distress signals through mycorrhizal connections, extending up to 30 meters away. Connected neighbors respond by activating defensive pathways before infection reaches them directly. The underground network behaves less like isolated roots, competing for nutrients, and more like a distributed exchange system, linking organisms into cooperative patterns of survival. Animal communication follows equally specialized pathways shaped by the physical structure of the rainforest itself. Certain Amazon tree frogs produce mating calls tuned precisely to the acoustics of their immediate surroundings. In dense vegetation where sound scatters unpredictably, their vocal frequencies interact with moisture, leaf density, and branch spacing in ways that maximize transmission through their specific microhabitats. The forest becomes part of the signal, shaping sound as actively as the animal producing it. Within dark river systems, over 200 species of weakly electric fish inhabit an entirely different sensory dimension. These animals generate faint electric fields around their bodies and detect distortions produced by nearby objects or organisms. The electrical pulses function simultaneously as navigation, species recognition, territorial display, and social communication. Multiple species may occupy the same water while perceiving completely separate electromagnetic landscapes, invisible to predators, prey, and even neighboring fish, lacking comparable sensory systems. Low-frequency communication travels through the Amazon with similar subtlety. Jaguars produce vocalizations containing infrasound components capable of moving through dense vegetation for more than 2 kilometers. Unlike higher frequencies that weaken rapidly among trunks and foliage, these deeper vibrations travel steadily through forest air and ground alike, allowing communication across distances where direct visibility is impossible. At the edge of these discoveries lies the emerging and controversial field of plant neurobiology. Peer-reviewed studies suggest certain Amazon plants display adaptive responses resembling functional memory and learning. Repeated exposure to specific stimuli can alter later reactions, allowing plants to respond differently based on previous environmental experience. Researchers remain cautious about applying animal terminology to plant systems, yet the findings continue to challenge older assumptions that intelligence and communication belong only to creatures with brains or nervous systems. Across the basin, information moves constantly through mediums once dismissed as empty space. Air carries chemistry, soil carries warning, water carries electricity, even stillness conceals exchange. At certain moments in the Amazon, the forest falls into a brief and measurable silence. Monkeys stop calling, birds vanish into still branches, even insects seem to thin from the air. Somewhere nearby, often unseen beneath layers of leaves and shadow, a jaguar is moving through the understory with almost no sound at all. The jaguar, Panthera onca, stands as the Amazon's only true terrestrial apex predator. Compact and massively built, it possesses a bite force approaching 1,500 pounds per square inch, the strongest relative bite force of any big cat on Earth. Unlike lions or tigers, which typically kill by suffocation, the jaguar evolved a different method entirely. It strikes with a single bite directed through the skull or upper spine, piercing bone directly into the brain or spinal cord. Turtle shells crack beneath that pressure. Caiman skulls collapse. The precision required for such kills reflects an evolutionary path distinct from every other large feline lineage. Its influence extends far beyond the animals it hunts directly. Across the basin, jaguars regulate populations of more than 80 prey species, from peccaries and deer to reptiles and smaller predators. Ecologists studying areas where jaguars disappeared observed subtle but expanding shifts in vegetation, prey behavior, and riverbank stability. The absence of one predator begins altering organisms many layers below it in the food web, including species never formally studied in relation to jaguars at all. High above this terrestrial world, another apex hunter governs the canopy. The harpy eagle moves between trunks with startling speed for a bird of its size, reaching nearly 80 kilometers per hour through dense forest corridors. Its talons rival the claws of large bears in scale, exerting grip forces exceeding 300 pounds per square inch. Few canopy animals can resist such force once captured. Adult monkeys, sloths, and large arboreal mammals disappear from branches in moments, lifted into the canopy by a predator perfectly adapted to aerial ambush within confined forest space. Near the rivers, however, dominance becomes less certain. The black caiman, Melanosuchus niger, inhabits the flooded margins where forest and water merge into one shifting environment. Mature individuals may exceed 5 meters in length and weigh over 450 kilograms. From beneath opaque water, the caiman becomes the basin's dominant aquatic predator, capable of ambushing capybaras, deer, and even jaguars approaching the shoreline. It remains the only Amazonian animal known to prey upon the terrestrial apex predator itself. Yet, the hierarchy does not always behave as expected. In 2021, remote camera trap footage captured a black caiman and a jaguar feeding simultaneously from the same carcass without visible aggression. Neither animal yielded territory. Neither attacked. The interaction unsettled existing predator models, which generally assume clear dominance relationships between apex carnivores occupying overlapping ecosystems. Elsewhere in the waterways, giant river otters complicate the structure further. Pteronura brasiliensis hunts not as isolated individuals, but as coordinated family groups, sometimes numbering 8 members. Their movements through water remain highly synchronized, with vocal signals and cooperative positioning allowing them to surround prey efficiently. Observers have documented groups driving caimans away from feeding sites and killing large anacondas through collective attack. Despite decades of study, many aspects of their cooperative strategy remain poorly understood. Across the Amazon, power shifts constantly between water, canopy, and forest floor. No single predator governs every layer completely. Instead, the basin sustains overlapping sovereignties, each dominant only within the boundaries of its own hidden world. Across the Amazon basin, forest disappears at a pace difficult for the human mind to visualize. Each year, approximately 10,000 square kilometers of rainforest are cleared, an area larger than the island of Cyprus removed tree by tree, road by road, fire by fire. From above, newly opened land often appears geometric against the surrounding forest, pale grids spreading outward into regions that remained continuous for millions of years. Yet the visible clearing marks only the beginning of the transformation. Within the density of the Amazon, biodiversity exists at such concentration that even small losses carry immense biological consequences. Based on current species density estimates, Scientists calculate that between 135 and 150 Amazon species disappear every day. Most vanish before formal science has documented their existence. Entire evolutionary histories may therefore end without photographs, preserved specimens, or recorded names, leaving behind only absence in ecosystems too vast for complete observation. The damage extends far beyond the boundaries of cleared land itself. Ecologists describe a phenomenon known as the edge effect, where forest bordering deforested zones begins changing almost immediately after exposure. Humidity declines. Wind penetrates deeper between trees. Temperatures rise along newly exposed margins. Up to 300 meters from the cut boundary, plant and animal communities begin shifting under altered environmental conditions. Species adapted to stable darkness and moisture retreat or disappear, meaning a single cleared corridor destabilizes a surrounding zone many times larger than the original cut. Recent climate studies suggest these cumulative disruptions may be approaching a critical threshold. A 2022 study published in the journal Nature concluded that roughly 75% of the Amazon basin now shows measurable weakening caused by deforestation, drought, and recurrent fire. Researchers warn that beyond a certain point, large sections of rainforest may lose the capacity to sustain themselves as closed humid systems and transition permanently into savanna. Such a shift would not resemble sudden collapse, but rather a gradual rearrangement of climate, vegetation, and water cycles unfolding over decades. The implications extend far beyond the basin itself. The Amazon's flying rivers, atmospheric currents generated by immense quantities of evaporated forest moisture, transport rainfall across much of South America. Agricultural regions, thousands of kilometers away, including areas as far south as Argentina, depend partly on water vapor originating in Amazonian forests. As deforestation interrupts these atmospheric flows, drought conditions intensify in places with no visible connection to the original forest loss. Paradoxically, destruction sometimes exposes biological discoveries at the same moment it threatens them. In 2018, researchers surveying a freshly logged area documented 23 species never previously recorded in that region. Many inhabited microhabitats immediately destabilized by the clearing itself. The act of opening inaccessible forest occasionally reveals organisms science had never encountered, even as the conditions supporting them disappear simultaneously. Beneath the damaged ground, another hidden archive persists quietly within the soil. Amazonian seed banks contain dormant seeds capable of surviving for decades before germinating under the right environmental conditions. Some may belong to plant species no longer existing as mature adults anywhere in the surrounding forest. Their genetic information remains suspended underground in a state between extinction and renewal, inaccessible to study until conditions allow life to emerge again. In this way, the Amazon continues holding undiscovered forms of life, even while parts of it vanish. The forest loses species faster than science can identify them, leaving gaps in knowledge that may never fully be measured. Near the slow rivers of the Amazon, there is a bird that seems to belong to another age entirely. The hoatzin moves awkwardly through tangled riverside branches, its blue face and rust-colored feathers carrying the appearance of something unfinished by modern evolution. Yet the strangest feature appears only in its young. Hoatzin chicks hatch with functional claws protruding from their wings, using them to climb vegetation after dropping into the water to escape predators. Fossils of Archaeopteryx from 150 million years ago preserve nearly identical structures. Small grasping claws from a period when feathered dinosaurs had not yet fully become birds. In the living forests of the Amazon, that ancient anatomy still survives. The Hoatzin's body carries another biological anomaly. Unlike every other bird on Earth, it digests leaves through foregut fermentation, a process more closely associated with cattle than with flighted animals. Bacteria inside an enlarged crop slowly break down tough plant matter before digestion continues deeper within the body. The process extracts nutrients from otherwise indigestible leaves, but at extraordinary metabolic cost. The swollen digestive chamber shifts the bird's center of gravity and weakens its flight muscles, leaving the Hoatzin capable only of clumsy bursts through dense riverside growth. It survives not through speed, but through the stability of a habitat that has remained wet and sheltered for millions of years. Elsewhere in Amazon waters, another evolutionary contradiction drifts beneath floating fruit and fallen nuts. The pacu, a relative of the piranha, possesses broad, molar-shaped teeth almost indistinguishable from human teeth at first glance. Their flattened surfaces evolved independently for crushing hard seeds and river nuts carried downstream during flood seasons. The resemblance is so striking that isolated jaw fragments have repeatedly been mistaken for human remains before detailed analysis revealed their true origin. Evolution arrived at nearly identical dental architecture through entirely different biological histories. Among the branches above the riverbanks, sloths move with such slowness that algae spreads across their fur in thin green films. Their metabolism operates at an unusually reduced pace, so low that body temperature fluctuates with surrounding conditions in ways more similar to reptiles than mammals. Sustained almost entirely by nutrient-poor leaves, sloths conserve energy through near-constant stillness. A mammal of similar size, with a typical metabolic rate, would quickly starve on the same diet. In the Amazon, survival sometimes favors extreme reduction rather than greater activity. Highland pools hidden within isolated Amazon elevations contain amphibians following another unusual path. Several neotenic salamander species retain larval characteristics throughout adulthood, including external gills and aquatic body structures normally lost during development. This process, known as neoteny, appears to be emerging independently across multiple Amazon amphibian lineages under changing environmental pressures, as though evolution repeatedly pauses midway through transformation. Certain Amazon lizards move even further from conventional reproductive biology. Several species reproduce entirely through parthenogenesis, producing offspring from unfertilized eggs without males at all. Each generation becomes a near genetic copy of the last, sacrificing diversity for reproductive efficiency in stable habitats where rapid population growth offers survival advantages. Within the muddy rivers themselves, the Bodo carries perhaps the most mysterious anatomy of all. The Amazon River dolphin possesses a brain approximately 40% larger relative to body size than marine dolphins, despite inhabiting sediment-heavy waters where visibility is almost non-existent. Neurologists studying its cerebral cortex have identified neural structures more intricate than required for any behavior yet observed. Deep within the flooded silence of the basin, evolution appears to have constructed capacities whose full purpose remains unknown. Long after the final shafts of sunlight dissolve into the upper leaves, the Amazon changes into something almost unrecognizable. The daytime forest, crowded with birds and insects moving through visible light, gives way to another biological order that waits behind the fading heat of afternoon. By sheer species count, the daylight world represents only a fraction of the basin's living activity. Most Amazon organisms emerge only after darkness settles across the rivers and canopy, transforming the forest into a realm governed less by sight than by vibration, scent, humidity, and sound. Among the branches, the night monkey begins to move. Aotus, the only truly nocturnal monkey on Earth, carries eyes so enormous relative to its skull that they cannot rotate within their sockets. Instead, the animal turns its entire head to follow movement through the darkness. Moonlight catches the reflective layer behind its retinas, allowing the monkey to navigate narrow branches with remarkable precision beneath a canopy that absorbs nearly all remaining light. Its world is shaped by dim outlines and faint movement, a visual system tuned not for color, but for survival within permanent shadow. As the forest darkens, its entire acoustic structure reorganizes. The daytime chorus of macaws and songbirds fades into distance, replaced by layers of sound emerging from hidden water, bark, and leaves. Frogs pulse in rhythmic intervals from flooded roots. Insects produce overlapping waves of vibration that fill the understory like mechanical rainfall. Mammals call across unseen clearings through frequencies that travel more effectively in cooler night air. Researchers studying Amazon acoustics often classify day and night as separate biological communities occupying the same geography but functioning through entirely different communication systems. Within this nocturnal transformation, pollination networks awaken that remain invisible during daylight hours. A majority of Amazon flowering plants depend exclusively on night-active pollinators, including moths, beetles, and nectar-feeding bats. Certain flowers open only after sunset, releasing chemical signals timed precisely to the emergence of their pollinating partners. Some produce pale petals that reflect minimal moonlight, while others rely almost entirely on scent trails drifting through humid air. A botanist studying the same forest during daylight could pass directly beside these interactions without ever realizing they exist. Above the rivers, the fishing bat moves through darkness with astonishing precision. Noctilio leperinus hunts using echolocation pulses that bounce from tiny disturbances on the water surface below. As fish rise near the surface, the bat detects minute changes in returning sound waves, then descends at full flight speed and hooks the prey from the water using elongated hind claws shaped almost like grappling hooks. The process unfolds within milliseconds, a chain of calculations occurring too quickly for human perception. In the leaves nearby, several Amazon tree frog species undergo another hidden transition. During daylight, they remain muted brown, blending into bark and dead foliage. As night temperatures settle and humidity rises, pigment cells within their skin expand and shift, transforming them into vivid greens or bright yellows. Researchers believe the color change is tied less to camouflage than to thermoregulation, allowing the frogs to manage heat exchange under cooler nocturnal conditions. Farther into the darkness, giant Amazon katydids begin to sing. Some species reach 15 centimeters in body length, their calls carrying through the forest at sound levels exceeding a nearby motorcycle engine. The vibrations travel across more than 200 meters of dense vegetation, turning unseen insects into dominant voices within the night air. In darkness, even the smallest lives can become the loudest presence in the forest. Some forms within the Amazon seem to have stepped across geological time without changing their shape. Biologists use the term living fossil for species whose physical structure has remained almost unchanged across immense spans of evolutionary history, suggesting that the environment surrounding them remained stable enough to impose little pressure for transformation. In most ecosystems, shifting climates and competition gradually reshape anatomy over millions of years. Yet within parts of the Amazon, certain organisms still carry designs that first appeared long before humans, mammals, or even flowering plants existed. Along the broad riverbanks, the giant Amazon river turtle drifts through muddy currents with a body plan almost identical to fossils dating back 80 million years. Parasitic expansa, with its flattened shell and elongated limbs adapted for river navigation, already resembled its modern form during the late Cretaceous period, while dinosaurs still dominated terrestrial Earth. Entire evolutionary dynasties rose and disappeared, while these turtles continued moving through freshwater channels in nearly unchanged form. Their survival reflects not stagnation, but extraordinary compatibility with an environment stable enough to preserve ancient biological solutions. Beneath floodplain mud, another survivor carries an even older inheritance. Lepidosiren paradoxa, the South American lungfish, possesses both gills and functional lungs, linking aquatic and air-breathing physiology within a single animal. During severe droughts, it buries itself inside hardened mud chambers and survives for months, breathing atmospheric oxygen, waiting for seasonal waters to return. This strategy descends from ancestors dating back more than 400 million years to the Devonian period, when vertebrate life first began experimenting with movement between water and land. Watching a lungfish surface to breathe is like observing an echo from the earliest chapters of terrestrial evolution. Farther into the river system, the arapaima carries another ancient adaptation hidden within its armor. Its enormous scales are built from alternating layers of mineral and collagen fibers arranged in a flexible composite structure. Instead of cracking under impact, the scales disperse force across multiple layers, resisting penetration while maintaining mobility. Materials scientists studying the species have examined this structure for applications in impact-resistant armor, yet human engineering still struggles to reproduce the same balance between strength and flexibility achieved naturally within the fish. In the Amazon, solutions refined through millions of years remain beyond complete technological imitation. In 2016, researchers identified a freshwater sponge species whose structure appeared almost indistinguishable from marine sponge fossils preserved from the Cambrian period 500 million years ago. The possibility that a lineage this ancient still persists in modern Amazon waters stretches almost beyond comprehension. Simple filter-feeding bodies that once existed in prehistoric oceans now survive in freshwater channels surrounded by rainforest. The Amazon's highland regions shelter plant lineages carrying similar antiquity. Towering tree ferns rise through misty elevations with forms nearly identical to those growing in Carboniferous forests 300 million years ago, before the emergence of dinosaurs. Their spiraled fronds and fibrous trunks belong to botanical families that endured continental drift, extinction events, and climate shifts while maintaining the same architectural blueprint. Seen together, these organisms reveal the Amazon as more than a rainforest shaped only by modern biology. It functions as a living archive where fragments of multiple geological eras continue breathing within the same landscape. Devonian survival strategies, Cambrian body structures, Cretaceous reptiles, and Carboniferous plants remain layered together beneath the canopy, preserved not inside stone, but within living tissue, still moving through water, mud, and shadow. A jar of river water from the Amazon no longer contains only water. Suspended within it drift fragments of skin, scales, spores, pollen, mucus, blood, bacteria, and invisible traces shed by thousands of living organisms moving through the basin. Modern biology has begun reading these fragments directly, turning rivers and soil into immense genetic archives. The technology driving this transformation is metagenomics, the sequencing of all genetic material contained within an environmental sample. Instead of searching the forest organism by organism, scientists now read the biological signatures left behind by life itself. In 2021, the Global Amazon Soil Microbiome Project gathered soil samples from 500 locations scattered across the basin. When researchers sequenced the genetic material contained within those samples, they identified more than 40,000 previously unknown bacterial species in a single study. The scale of discovery surpassed anything previously recorded in microbiology. Entire microbial worlds had existed beneath the forest floor, unnoticed, hidden not because they were rare, but because they were too small and too numerous for traditional observation to detect. Some discoveries reached even deeper into the foundations of biology. Metagenomic analysis revealed groups now known as CPR bacteria and D. panarchaea, lineages so genetically unusual that researchers were forced to create entirely new taxonomic categories to contain them. These microorganisms possess radically reduced genomes and metabolic systems, unlike those of most previously known life forms. Their existence suggested that major branches of the tree of life had remained effectively invisible until sequencing technology became capable of detecting them. Beneath the Amazon soil, evolution had been running parallel experiments for billions of years beyond the reach of human sight. The same genetic tools have begun altering the understanding of time itself within Amazon biology. Researchers, extracting ancient DNA from museum specimens collected more than 150 years ago, discovered that several species, assumed to be evolutionarily stable, had undergone substantial genetic divergence during that relatively brief historical period. Externally, the animals appeared unchanged. Internally, their genomes revealed ongoing adaptation invisible to morphology alone. Evolution, once thought to unfold too slowly for direct observation in large organisms, had continued quietly beneath familiar appearances. Across the basin, another project now operates continuously within the river systems themselves. Automated environmental DNA sampling stations collect water from Amazon tributaries and sequence the genetic traces carried within the current. Each sample functions like a census assembled from microscopic residue. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, insects, and microbes leave fragments of themselves drifting downstream, allowing scientists to construct real-time biological maps of river ecosystems without directly encountering the organisms involved. The system has already identified species inhabiting waterways where they had never previously been recorded. As genetic data accumulates, another unsettling pattern continues to emerge. Many Amazon organisms, long classified as single widespread species, are proving to be complexes of multiple, genetically distinct species that simply resemble one another externally. This phenomenon, called cryptic species diversity, appears repeatedly across frogs, birds, fish, reptiles, and insects. A single familiar animal may conceal 3, 5, or even 8 separate evolutionary lineages hidden beneath nearly identical anatomy. A modeling study, published in 2023, attempted to account for this concealed diversity across the Amazon basin, incorporating cryptic species estimates into vertebrate counts. Researchers concluded that the true number of Amazon vertebrate species may be between 2 and 4 times higher than currently recognized. Even after centuries of exploration, the forest appears less cataloged with each technological advance. The deeper science looks into the Amazon, the more the visible world begins to seem like only the surface layer of something vastly larger beneath it. From orbit, the Amazon appears less like a forest than a planetary organ stretched across the continent. Beneath the canopy, trunks, leaves, roots, and soil hold between 150 and 200 billion tons of carbon within living tissue and decomposing matter. This immense biological reserve exceeds more than 15 years of current global carbon emissions, making the Amazon the largest terrestrial carbon store on Earth. Every towering tree and submerged root system functions as part of a vast atmospheric exchange that has been stabilizing Earth's climate for millions of years. Throughout each day, the forest breathes in slow chemical rhythms. Through photosynthesis, Amazon vegetation absorbs approximately 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually, drawing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it inside wood, leaves, and soil. For most of recorded scientific history, the basin functioned as a net carbon sink, absorbing more carbon than it released. Yet recent measurements have revealed a gradual shift. A study published in 2021 found that heavily degraded and deforested sections of the Amazon now emit more carbon than they absorb. Burned forests, drying soils, and decaying vegetation have begun reversing a process that once stabilized the atmosphere. The canopy also shapes climate through the physics of light itself. Dense Amazon vegetation forms a dark surface that absorbs large amounts of solar radiation. Cleared land or open savanna reflects far more sunlight back into the atmosphere, altering regional heat dynamics through what climatologists call the albedo effect. As sections of forest disappear, the land below becomes brighter, drier, and hotter, contributing to atmospheric warming through mechanisms extending beyond carbon release alone. Far above the trees, invisible rivers continue moving across the continent. Moisture released by billions of leaves rises into the atmosphere through transpiration, forming massive airborne currents that drift northward and westward before feeding rainfall systems across South America. This hydrological circulation supplies water to agricultural regions thousands of kilometers from the basin itself, sustaining crops, reservoirs, and river systems depended upon indirectly by nearly 800 million people. Rain falling over distant plains may have first evaporated from Amazon leaves days earlier. The forest does not merely respond to climate. It actively creates the conditions that allow it to exist. Amazon trees release volatile organic compounds into the atmosphere, microscopic particles that help seed cloud formation. These aerosols encourage the development of cloud cover that cools the basin and preserves atmospheric moisture, creating what researchers describe as a biotic pump. The forest generates part of its own protective weather system through countless chemical exchanges occurring invisibly above the canopy. Yet this balance contains an unsettling vulnerability. Rising temperatures and increasingly irregular rainfall place physiological stress upon the very trees responsible for producing these cloud-seeding compounds. As drought intensifies, the trees reduce aerosol output, weakening cloud formation and allowing further warming and drying. Scientists describe this process as the Amazon climate feedback loop, a self-reinforcing cycle in which environmental stress gradually undermines the forest's own stabilizing mechanisms. Current climate models suggest that if between 20 and 25% of the Amazon's original forest cover disappears, large portions of the system may cross an irreversible threshold into savannification. Estimates indicate that approximately 17 to 20% has already been lost. The boundary separating resilience from transformation now exists not in distant centuries, but within the living forest of the present moment. Far above the forest, satellites trace the bends of rivers with mathematical precision, while laboratories sequence DNA through machines bright with cold artificial light. Yet the Amazon continues holding living forms that remain unnamed, misplaced, or entirely unrecognized, as though the basin still moves at a slower rhythm than the systems built to catalog it. In 2023, researchers formally identified a new species of river dolphin, Inia araguaiensis, inhabiting Brazil's Araguaia River system. River dolphins have been studied for generations, their pale bodies surfacing through sediment-rich water beside fishing boats and flooded forests. The Araguaia itself had already undergone repeated biological surveys across decades. Still, genetic analysis revealed that these dolphins represented a distinct species, isolated evolutionarily from other Bodo populations for hundreds of thousands of years. It became the first newly described river dolphin species in nearly 100 years, discovered not in hidden wilderness, but within waterways science believed thoroughly examined. Only a few years earlier, another revision emerged from the body of an animal already famous throughout the basin. In 2020, genetic studies of preserved anaconda specimens identified a separate lineage, Eunectes acaima, concealed for over a century beneath the classification of the common green anaconda. Outwardly, the snakes appeared nearly identical, immense coils resting motionless beneath floating vegetation. Yet, molecular evidence revealed deep evolutionary separation. Some researchers now suspect this newly recognized species may be the heaviest snake on Earth by mass. The jaguar, too, continues appearing where ecological expectations predict absence. In 2019, camera traps documented a previously unknown jaguar population surviving within heavily fragmented forest landscapes considered too degraded to support large predators. The animals persisted inside isolated forest remnants, connected only by narrow strips of riverside vegetation. These riparian corridors were so thin they disappeared entirely from many habitat models, yet they formed hidden passageways through which the cats continued moving between territories undetected. While mammals emerged from obscurity, the forest floor itself began revealing older secrets. In 2022, aerial LiDAR surveys sent pulses of laser light through gaps in the canopy, allowing researchers to map the ground beneath dense vegetation. The scans exposed more than 10,000 previously unknown pre-Columbian earthwork structures spread across the Amazon basin, geometric embankments, roads, and ceremonial formations concealed for centuries beneath roots and leaf litter. Their scale forced archaeologists to reconsider long-held assumptions about Amazonian civilization before European arrival, suggesting societies far larger and more interconnected than earlier theories allowed. Even botanical collections already resting inside scientific institutions continue changing the story. In 2018, researchers studying specimens from the Peruvian Amazon identified not merely a new species, but an entirely new genus of flowering plants. The specimen had remained hidden inside a regional herbarium for years, misidentified despite repeated botanical surveys in the surrounding forest since the 1970s. Recognition arrived only when careful re-examination revealed anatomical structures unlike any known relative. Beyond laboratories and verified taxonomy, older mysteries continue drifting through indigenous memory. Across distant Amazon cultures with no direct connection to one another, stories persist of the mapinguari, a massive ground-dwelling creature described as slow-moving, foul-smelling, and marked by backward-facing feet and unusual facial anatomy. Some paleontologists have suggested these traditions may preserve cultural memory of Megatherium, the giant ground sloth that disappeared approximately 10,000 years ago. Together, these discoveries reveal a pattern becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. Each year, the Amazon produces organisms, histories, and biological relationships that do not simply extend existing scientific frameworks. Again and again, they reshape them from within. Across laboratories, archive vaults, satellites, and drifting field stations anchored beside remote tributaries, the scientific relationship with the Amazon has begun changing from exploration into urgency. For centuries, researchers entered the forest believing there would always be more time to understand it. Now, much of modern Amazon science moves with the quiet awareness that discovery and disappearance are unfolding simultaneously. In 2022, nations adopted the Global Biodiversity Framework, an international agreement establishing the goal of protecting 30% of Earth's land and ocean by 2030. The Amazon sits near the center of that ambition. Its basin contains one of the largest remaining concentrations of intact biodiversity on the planet, yet less than half of the protected territory required to meet the target currently exists. Conservation planners increasingly describe the Amazon not as one important ecosystem among many, but as a stabilizing structure upon which planetary biodiversity goals now depend. At the same time, researchers have begun preserving the forest through sound. Thousands of autonomous recording devices are being distributed across the basin as part of a growing bioacoustic archive project. Hidden among branches, riverbanks, and canopy towers, these instruments continuously record the living acoustics of the forest: insects pulsing through darkness, frogs vibrating through flooded vegetation, distant mammals moving unseen beyond the trees. The archive is intended to create a biological baseline, allowing future scientists to detect extinction not first through missing bodies, but through vanished voices. Elsewhere, preservation takes a quieter form still. Seed bank initiatives linked to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault and regional Amazonian collections are racing to gather plant seeds before habitats disappear. Yet, the arithmetic remains unsettling. Current collections represent less than 3% of known Amazon plant species, while unknown species remain impossible to preserve by definition. Entire genetic lineages may vanish before science realizes they existed. Above the canopy, another transformation is underway. Autonomous drone systems, equipped with hyperspectral imaging cameras, now move across hundreds of square kilometers in a single survey flight, identifying plant species through the chemical signatures reflected from their leaves. Variations invisible to the human eye emerge as distinct spectral patterns, allowing researchers to map forest chemistry with extraordinary precision. In only a few years, these aerial systems have surveyed more Amazon terrain than generations of ground expeditions combined. Beneath this expanding technological network, conservation genomics has emerged as a parallel race against time. Laboratories across the world are collecting genetic material from Amazon organisms at unprecedented speed, building archives intended to preserve biological information even if the species themselves disappear. Tissue samples, blood, spores, pollen, and environmental DNA are frozen into storage systems designed to outlast ecological collapse, fragments of evolutionary history condensed into sequences of molecular code. Meanwhile, field studies continue, revealing how quickly portions of the forest can respond when ecological structures remain intact. Rewilding research, tracking jaguar range expansion into recovering landscapes, has shown that predator presence alone begins altering vegetation patterns within approximately 5 years. Herbivore behavior shifts, browsing pressure declines, and young growth returns in places previously stripped bare. The effects ripple outward through systems far larger than the predators themselves. Yet beneath every archive, survey, and restoration model lies an uncomfortable calculation. At current rates of discovery, scientists estimate it would require roughly 300 years to formally describe all remaining undescribed Amazon species. At current rates of deforestation and ecological disruption, many researchers believe most of those species could disappear within the next 50 years, leaving portions of the forest biologically absent before they are scientifically known. Deep within research stations built beside flooded channels and beneath towers rising above the canopy, the Amazon has gradually become more than a rainforest to modern science. It now functions as a living reference point for questions extending far beyond Earth itself. Astrobiologists, studying the origins and possibilities of extraterrestrial life, increasingly look toward the basin not because it is simple, but because it is overwhelmingly complex. Life here has diversified under poor soils, unstable flooding cycles, relentless competition, and biological density so extreme that entire ecosystems exist within the bark of a single tree. This complexity has drawn unexpected comparisons to worlds orbiting far from the sunday. Beneath the frozen crust of Saturn's moon Enceladus lies a subsurface ocean warmed by hydrothermal activity deep below the ice. On Earth, hydrothermal systems support some of the most biologically rich microbial environments ever discovered. Scientists studying the Amazon's flooded forests have begun treating them as partial surface analogs for those hidden extraterrestrial oceans. During seasonal flooding, immense regions of forest transform into submerged labyrinths where fish navigate among drowned branches and microorganisms bloom through oxygen-poor water, creating layered ecosystems shaped by darkness, chemistry, and shifting currents rather than sunlight alone. At the same time, the Amazon has strengthened one of biology's most important evolutionary observations. Across unrelated species separated by millions of years of ancestry, identical survival strategies continue emerging independently. Echolocation evolved in river dolphins and bats. Electric field communication appeared in multiple fish lineages. Camouflage structures resembling leaves, bark, and shadows developed repeatedly among insects, reptiles, and amphibians. Venom systems arose through entirely separate evolutionary pathways in snakes, frogs, spiders, and insects. The forest demonstrates that when environmental pressures converge, life repeatedly discovers similar solutions. Many astrobiologists now suspect the same principle may extend beyond Earth, meaning alien ecosystems could evolve recognizable biological strategies even from entirely different origins. Beneath the visible forest, another comparison quietly unfolds. The Amazon's immense microbial world remains only partially understood, with vast populations of chemically active bacteria, fungi, and archaea existing beyond direct observation. This hidden biosphere resembles what researchers expect within Earth's own subterranean dark biosphere, ecosystems living deep underground without sunlight, sustained instead through chemical energy and mineral metabolism. Similar conditions may exist beneath the frozen crusts of distant moons or below the surface of ancient Martian aquifers where liquid water once persisted. The implications extend beyond ecology into information itself. Every Amazon species contains genetic solutions refined through millions of years of evolutionary testing. Enzymes, defensive compounds, sensory systems, Metabolic pathways and structural adaptations form an archive of biological experimentation unmatched anywhere on Earth. The basin operates less like a collection of organisms and more like a library written in DNA, each species preserving instructions shaped by ancient environmental challenges. The disappearance of that library represents more than extinction. It removes information that cannot be reconstructed once lost. Again and again, the Amazon has also revealed the limits of scientific certainty. Each period in which researchers believed the forest broadly understood has been followed by discoveries exposing deeper layers of biological complexity. Species thought singular became multiple hidden lineages. Empty regions proved densely inhabited. Stable ecosystems concealed invisible communication networks. In this quiet pattern, the forest has repeatedly corrected the assumptions imposed upon it. From this, a larger implication has begun slowly emerging. If the most studied rainforest on Earth still contains millions of unknown organisms and relationships, then humanity's understanding of life itself, whether on this planet or another, may remain far smaller than science once imagined. Among scientists who spend decades inside the Amazon, there is a quiet phrase that appears more often in journals and interviews than it once did: ecological grief. The term describes a measurable psychological response observed in researchers who return year after year to forests they once knew intimately, only to discover that the living patterns around them have thinned, shifted, or vanished altogether. Unlike sudden catastrophe, the change often arrives gradually enough to evade immediate notice. A bird call no longer interrupts the morning canopy. Certain insects stop appearing beside lanterns at night. A frog species, once abundant along a stream, simply fails to return with the rains. Long-term field biologists sometimes describe reopening notebooks from earlier expeditions and realizing that entire layers of biological activity recorded decades before can no longer be found in the same places. In some regions, mammal tracks once common along riverbanks have disappeared without evidence of hunting or disease. Botanists revisiting tagged plots occasionally find gaps where rare understory plants once grew, with no visible disturbance explaining their absence. The unsettling quality lies partly in the silence surrounding these disappearances. Many species do not decline dramatically enough to attract formal attention. They simply cease to be encountered. Within the Amazon, this creates a philosophical problem unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Species that vanish before formal identification leave no scientific footprint behind them. No preserved specimen enters a museum drawer. No Latin name is assigned. No genetic sequence is archived. From the perspective of recorded science, such organisms effectively never existed at all. Yet each represented a distinct evolutionary experiment, shaped across immense stretches of geological time, carrying biochemical structures, ecological interactions, and genetic information that disappeared with them. Using current estimates of species density alongside long-term deforestation data, researchers calculate that between 50,000 and 150,000 Amazon species may already have vanished since 1970 without ever being formally described. Many likely survived for millions of years before disappearing within decades. Entire chemical pathways, microbial relationships, pollination systems, and defensive compounds may have vanished before human instruments ever detected them. In this way, extinction in the Amazon often occurs invisibly, below the threshold of observation. For taxonomists working among undescribed organisms, the act of naming carries an unusual emotional gravity. Assigning a species formal recognition does not preserve the organism physically, yet it grants permanence within human knowledge. A named species can be studied, referenced, remembered, and protected. Without that recognition, disappearance becomes nearly absolute. Some researchers describe taxonomy not merely as classification, but as a race against erasure itself. Those who spend much of their lives in the basin often speak about another sensation difficult to explain outside the forest. The Amazon remains so vast, so biologically layered, that hope persists almost automatically. Beyond each tributary, beyond each unmapped ridge or isolated floodplain, there is always the possibility that unknown life still continues untouched. That belief sustains many researchers through exhausting years of work. At the same time, it sharpens the awareness that countless forms of life may already have vanished beyond recovery, hidden by the same immensity that once protected them. And beneath all of this rests a larger question the forest leaves unresolved. If existence can disappear before knowledge reaches it, then the boundary between what humanity knows and what the living world contains may be far wider and far more fragile than science once believed. Long before the first maps divided continents into shapes and borders, before astronomy named the planets or biology classified life into kingdoms, the Amazon was already old. For approximately 55 million years, the forest has persisted through planetary transformations that erased mountain ranges, redirected oceans, and extinguished entire branches of life. Every empire humanity remembers rose and disappeared within a fraction of that span. Every scientific model built to explain the forest emerged only yesterday against the scale of its continuity. What appears, from above, as an immense collection of individual trees is increasingly understood as something more unified. Beneath the soil, root systems intertwine with fungal filaments in vast mycorrhizal webs that transfer nutrients, chemical signals, and biological information across extraordinary distances. The living canopy standing today remains physically connected to organisms that germinated before agriculture existed in many parts of the world. In that sense, the forest does not merely regenerate. It persists. Growth, decay, and renewal move through it continuously, like circulation through a body too large to perceive all at once. Many indigenous Amazonian cultures have long approached this continuity from an entirely different direction than modern science. Rather than treating the forest as property, resource, or wilderness separate from human existence, they understand it as a living system within which humans participate temporarily. Animals, rivers, trees, and people occupy the same relational fabric rather than separate categories. In recent decades, conservation biologists have increasingly drawn upon these perspectives as extraction-based models repeatedly destabilized the ecosystems they attempted to manage. The older understanding now appears less metaphorical than once assumed. Meanwhile, countless Amazonian species continue their existence beyond observation. Creatures never photographed or sampled still navigate flooded routes beneath blackwater rivers. Insects unknown to taxonomy emerge briefly after rainfall, reproduce, and disappear again into bark fissures or leaf litter. Microscopic organisms exchange genetic material through soils no human has ever touched. Their lives unfold with complete indifference to discovery. Whether named or unnamed, studied or unseen, evolution proceeds around them continuously. In the Brazilian Amazon stands a specimen of Cariniana micrantha, estimated to be more than 1,400 years old. The tree was already ancient when the first Europeans crossed the Atlantic, unaware that the continent existed. Through centuries of storms, drought cycles, and changing river courses, it continued adding silent rings beneath its bark. Around its trunk, generations of animals nested, fed, hunted, decomposed, and vanished. A single old-growth Amazon tree contains biological density almost difficult to comprehend clearly. Within its bark, canopy, roots, cavities, moss layers, and decaying wood live between 2,000 and 4,000 species simultaneously. Beetles tunnel through its interior chambers, while fungi digest fallen branches overhead. Orchids anchor themselves along high limbs where amphibians shelter inside trapped rainwater. Birds feed on insects hidden beneath epiphytes, while mammals travel through the canopy, carrying seeds that will become future forests. One tree functions less as an individual organism than as an entire ecological city suspended between earth and sky. Seen from this scale of time and complexity, the Amazon's hidden life no longer resembles secrecy. The forest does not conceal its creatures deliberately, nor withhold them from human understanding. It is simply vast enough, ancient enough, and biologically intricate enough that discovery becomes secondary to existence itself. The unknown species were never waiting to be found. They were always there, continuing quietly within a living world that did not require observation in order to endure. While these final moments have unfolded, somewhere within the Amazon, another small discovery has likely entered the scientific record. A beetle separated from a known lineage by the curve of its antennae. A fungus carrying chemistry no laboratory has studied before. A frog whose call belongs to no archived recording. In the same span of time, other organisms almost certainly disappeared unnoticed, leaving behind no specimen, no sequence, no name. Across the duration of this story, scientists have formally described approximately 3 new Amazon species. An unknown number vanished before recognition ever arrived. From high above the basin at night, the forest becomes something difficult for the modern world to fully comprehend. Over 5.5 million square kilometers, darkness stretches across the continent with almost no interruption. Few roads cut through it. Few artificial lights remain visible beneath the clouds. Rivers move like dim veins beneath the canopy, reflecting faint fragments of moonlight before vanishing again into blackness. Yet this darkness is not empty. By every biological measure known to science, it is the most crowded living system on Earth. Within that unseen expanse, leaves continue unfolding toward humidity and heat. Insects move through layers of bark older than recorded history. Electric fish drift through sediment clouds, carrying silent fields around their bodies. Roots exchange nutrients through fungal threads beneath the soil, while night pollinators navigate flowers that bloom only after sunset. Thousands of interactions occur each second without witness, independent of observation, complete in themselves. The forest also continues performing one of the largest biological processes on the planet. Through photosynthesis, the Amazon produces approximately 20% of Earth's oxygen. Every fifth breath taken anywhere in the world contains oxygen generated within this immense living system. The exchange happens continuously, quietly, without intention. No tree understands the atmosphere it stabilizes. No river comprehends the rainfall patterns it helps sustain across distant continents. The forest possesses no awareness of its own importance. For approximately 55 million years, it has simply continued. And perhaps that continuity explains why so much of the Amazon still resists complete understanding. The hidden creatures of the basin are not concealed deliberately. Their invisibility emerges from scale, from geological time, from evolutionary density layered over millions of years. The forest is not withholding answers from science. It is operating at a level of biological complexity larger than any framework humans have yet constructed to describe it fully. Every species that has ever lived there has existed partly as a secret. Long before human beings developed language, taxonomy, or curiosity about distant ecosystems, life within the Amazon was already diversifying in silence. Entire evolutionary histories unfolded beneath the canopy without witness. Predators hunted, flowers opened, microorganisms exchanged genes through flooded soils. Extinction and emergence continued side by side for ages before any human mind existed to wonder what else might be there. Now, as the river moves through darkness once more, the canopy continues its slow breathing overhead. Somewhere, beyond the reach of roads and satellites, something unnamed still travels through roots, water, or leaves exactly where it has always lived. The forest remains immense enough to hold that life without revealing it, old enough to outlast the questions asked of it, and quiet enough that the final understanding arrives not as an answer, but as stillness,